1, 2, 1, 2, Juicy Talk. Hey, my friends, it's Ray, and I'm here with you on a solo episode. Ohad went to the garage. The grocery delivery guy has already brought everything, and Jules has come after a morning walk and a good meal. And I decided I want to open the microphone and record a solo episode. What's the date today? 2 weeks after my birthday. We are in the middle of Passover, and Passover is always my birthday, spring, a holiday, and of course vacation. This time it was a milestone birthday. I switched decades. I reached midlife. Ohad talked about this festival he was going to produce for me endlessly. I admit that at first I didn't know what I wanted, what's my wildest fantasy, and how do I want to celebrate this special date. So we booked a flight to Thailand, which was planned for 2 days after my birthday. That is on April 14th. And already somewhere a month and a half into the war, it was clear that we wouldn't fly to Thailand this year. And then when I tried to cancel the tickets with El Al, I discovered that my extravagant husband had booked business class tickets, including VIP service. The suite we chose was a presidential suite with a balcony facing the sea and a private pool. It was supposed to be my fantasy, but the truth is I am much more minimalist or basic when it comes to vacations, and honestly, I didn't know how to take a vacation before I met Ohad. I thought that when I met a partner, it would come automatically, and indeed, until I met Ohad, I didn't really vacation just because I had more important things to check off on my career journey. I was on my way to making something of myself in this world. I mostly traveled for work and loved it, whether as an agent with models I represented in London. On a women's journey, I led to Morocco, or a flight as a blogger to Rome. Do you remember COVID-19? Yes, it feels like a lifetime ago, right? In the second week of March 2020, we all had to freeze our lives, stay home, and ask big questions about the meaning of existence. In my case, it caused me to take time and energy for the most important meeting in my life, my meeting with Ohad. In hindsight, I understand that only with Ohad did I dare to ask myself who I am without my job, what identity I choose to maintain today. Is there meaning to my life just by being who I am? And what is that meaning? I want to pause for a moment just to tell you that this time there is no guest here. As I said, it's a solo episode. It's just me with the microphone and my thoughts in an open channel to you, dear friends and listeners that I feel closer and closer to. Many times I wanted, dreamed and tried to record alone, but I probably wasn't ready for it yet. And I think I still didn't understand what my superpower was. Fortunately, I finally understand how much value I have to offer here, and I'm going to try to articulate it for you, but also for myself. Don't worry, it's not necessarily going to be a podcast that's only solo from now on, and I'm not declaring a defined format here, but the fact that I have a studio at home and I accompany women business owners in establishing podcasts, creating engaging content, and voicing our unique voices in the world reopened my hunger to continue sharing my personal journey with you through this wonderful tool that I even recently called podcast therapy. I promise to expand on this later, but this time I want this podcast to bring you more. I want to create a dialogue about creation and uniqueness, breaking patterns, and essentially everything that interests us today as women in a chaotic world, in a journey of uncertainty and returning to our deepest intuitions and voicing our unique voice in the world. I will talk a lot here about the workshop and the studio, but before we start, I want to tell you that we have 2 upcoming podcast workshops. The May workshop will start on the 2nd of May, which is next week. Oh my God, that's so exciting. And the June workshop will start immediately after that, is on June 7th. This is a workshop of 5 meetings on Thursday mornings, at the end of which you will have your own branded podcast channel on air. Additionally, you will have a long intro with a soundtrack and a defined format for the podcast with a plan for the future. Right after the holiday, I will start recording here in the studio women's podcasts of the workshop graduates and more. And I'm waiting for the magic that will happen here. But it's important for me to emphasize that the workshop can also prepare you for independent recording and editing if you decide to go for it. There are some workshop graduates who have already recorded and published on their own. It's really a practical workshop that covers both the necessary knowledge in terms of content, technology, personal accompaniment, and integration from me personally for each participant, and also a support, brainstorming, and creative inspiration group. And it's really, really magical. Wow, even I didn't know how powerful this thing of voicing our unique voice in the world would be. It's an intimate workshop with super high quality women who love and consume podcasts and deep content in general, women who have something to say and are ready to go out with it to the world, women who understand the power of this platform from a business branding and marketing perspective through direct connection with their community, and also a fascinating personal journey that happens for each one in front of herself. This is what actually made me want to go back to recording, and this time alone with myself, to start some new journey where I can lose my thoughts while learning. I can talk for hours about the workshop, and I will definitely do so later. But in the meantime, if you have a dream or idea to record your own podcast, or if you are simply ready for your next deep process, you are invited to contact me on WhatsApp or email, and we will have a conversation and get to know each other, and I will answer all your questions. So welcome to my podcast Juicy Talk solo episode. I am Ray. For those who don't know me, I am an entrepreneur, content creator, podcaster, and owner of the Juicy Talk studio. I thought about how to connect this topic of freedom when we actually have captives and many families that have joined the circle of bereavement, many evacuees and many people who have lost their jobs, and reservists and women waiting for them at home. All this happens during Passover, which is the holiday of freedom. So I thought about how to connect everything together. I started reading now the book by Viktor Frankl, The Bookman's Search for Meaning, and I wanted to read you something from it, but I felt I needed to read the whole book first. Viktor Frankl says that the meaning of a person is what keeps him alive. It is what makes him continue to withstand all the suffering in the world, even the suffering of the Holocaust. And I decided that I would finish reading the book, and then I would give you the insights I took from it. But basically what Viktor Frankl says is that our freedom lies in our inner world. That means the only thing no one can harm and we have responsibility and control over is essentially our consciousness. As a very sensitive woman in a chaotic world of war and pain, I feel I need to extra protect my consciousness. And I found here in the book of my dear friend, who is also a podcaster, Galia Ben Haim, the book is called Seeds of Humanity, and it actually brings the wisdom of Yemima Avital to everyday life. I happen to open it every day to a different page and focus on a sentence of Yemima and Galia's interpretation. It always gives me value. And the quote goes like this: freedom is getting closer to everything that is engraved in you. And I really, really connect to this quote. Look at what Galia writes. A free woman. When I look back on the timeline of my life, I realize how many years I lived in slavery. What will they say about me? What will they think? I was ashamed of my flaws and deficiencies and hid them. This slavery managed my choices and decided what to do and how to act. It limited my existence to such an extent that what they thought about me was light years away from who I really am. I was in Egypt, as they say, in Passover. Shells and chains protected my inner essence while life was conducted in struggle, justification, and great effort. So who can't connect to this text? It continues here about really removing the layers, and I talked about this issue of titles and the removal of these titles in episodes and recorded with the amazing Efrat Fogel, The Gate to Midlife. Essentially, we have some opportunity at this age, after we have collected all the titles and definitions and hobbies and scars, both the good and the bad things, and formed who we are. We have an opportunity to decide what stays and what goes. And it's basically like Passover, cleaning, airing out in spring, deciding what we keep in our lives and what we define as leaven, And I feel that the podcast helped me a lot in this process, which titles I want to keep in my life, what freedom I want to create for myself. These definitions really limited me, and I was afraid of how I would appear outside, and this thing caused me to be in a kind of inner prison with myself, a lot of judgment, a lot of fear. I feel I am no longer there, and that is why I also opened the microphone. I highly recommend this book to you. There is another paragraph here I want to read. I agreed to be enough, and still, every day I remind myself that I am enough as I can, as I want. I strive to stop missing out on closeness and truth. I learned to set boundaries, and I am still learning. I experimented with saying no and balancing giving, and this too is a life lesson. I have forgiven and I forgive. I have shown mercy and I show mercy. This is freedom. This is redemption. So for me, this podcast is getting closer to everything that is engraved in you. Because through the podcast, I discover my uniqueness, I discover my superpower, I speak it, I air it out, I bring it out, and I receive responses to it from the world. This thing gives me mirrors and helps me really understand the essence, the meaning, the most important things in my life. I think the podcast gives me this freedom. Think about it. In the past, if you wanted to get on the radio or TV, you had to first go through the army radio station, the army spokesperson's office, the army theater, the military band, and then gradually with these connections to advance and get some voice. Today, each one of us can open a microphone and bring herself. This feminine wisdom, these female voices, our experiences as women in this world are important, deserve to come out into the open, to air out and to teach each other. All the wisdom that was kept in the red tent, wisdom that was passed from generation to generation, from woman to woman, quietly beneath the surface. But now it's time to write her story, our history. I want to tell you my podcast journey. It reminds me a bit of a birth story, and in many ways my podcast journey is my birth of myself as a woman of value and meaning in the world. Let's go into my Instagram and scroll back to the period before the podcast was established. It was this time of Corona. I had questions. I see here's a post I wrote after my 36th birthday. From my many years, you can keep calling me a girl, but it no longer works on me. I already know a thing or two about myself. Just like Rita's song, I know something about this world. I am sensitive and it takes me time to deal with these intensities. And here, still very sensitive, I already knew. So after a perfect birthday full of love, I returned to my warm shell. Age 36 is a wonderful age, and I love myself and my life at this age. And I love the people around me, my family, friends, and my perfect partners, the juiciest models inside out in the lovely agency I founded, and I can say I am proud of what I have achieved so far. I don't have much to say or sum up about the Corona period. In my opinion, it will take us a long time to understand what really happened here. Yes, we are still trying. What you did make me very happy on my birthday. I feel like it was years ago, but still worth saying thank you. And I appreciate and love you all very much. What do I wish for myself this year? Well, clearly to return to life and go full throttle on juicy, but honestly, the most important thing is love. I wish myself huge love this year. Well, it's time. 2 weeks later, I met Ohad. Then I talk here about photography as therapy. I talk about our uniqueness. It's amazing that I started talking about it here. Listen, that's one powerful post. I don't want to keep raising the plus size flag forever. This message has served me and the fashion and advertising industry by breaking conventional patterns and creating legitimacy for a magnificent variety of body shapes, sizes, heights, colors, ages, and more. This discourse has allowed many women to break the glass ceiling in the last decade and feel comfortable in their bodies and their skin. But that's it. We are already in a different place and it's time to move on. Today, every woman can, and in my opinion, must raise her own flag. Wow, what a statement. to do everything in her power to celebrate her body and her personality and all the magical resources within her. Today's plus is the personality, the values, the talents, the bursting character, and in one word, the uniqueness within us. Let's drink to each one's plus and raise a toast to the juice within us, which is so much more than just how we look. Who's with me on this? Hashtag walk the talk. Apparently, there was really a time with many questions and many thoughts about beauty, about the agency, about being in the front, about accompanying and promoting other women, about being a role model. Alongside the agency, I decided to set up a mentorship program that helps women move to the front. But what we actually did was find the uniqueness and create content from it, which is actually quite similar to what I do today in the podcast. Just with the tool of the podcast, it takes me back to a period of falling in love with Ohad alongside creating content and setting up the mentorship program. Here I also talked about successes. What's important is not the number of successes you have, but how successful you really feel. But we will also talk here about success in the podcast later, how to turn uniqueness into a brand. How does this magic actually happen? It turns out that for nearly 4 years, I have been dealing with uniqueness, and this is after I dealt with personal branding, because I understood that every model must also bring who she is and her uniqueness, otherwise she won't stand out. And honestly, I'm not interested in bringing copy-paste, bringing duplicates. I wanted to bring juicy, cool women. I wanted to create a strong community of women who love themselves. Those were my goals. Wow, here I see that I appeared on Bar Romanski's podcast, and I remember, first of all, it's really an amazing podcast, and I'm really, really happy that Bar came back to Israel and she's back recording her podcast because she is a brilliant girl. I remember being on her podcast and saying to myself, wow, what is this? I want a podcast, but it seems so complicated. How do you do it? While asking myself questions about myself, about the agency, about the meaning of life, and starting to accompany women on the journey to finding their uniqueness and turning their content into authority. I met Natalie Rogel, who joined the mentorship program. And Natalie Rogel is a podcaster herself, who had a podcast that even won the Geek Time Podcast of the Year twice in a row in the marketing field. It's a podcast called Digital Animals, and she's a champ, Natalie, and she also became a friend. And she's the one who pushed me and advanced me to start the podcast. It was in October. Okay, so in October 2020, I started my podcast. That means it's been on air for 3.5 years. Natalie pushed me and helped me understand how to write the intro and the format and what I wanted to do there. Of course, in terms of equipment, I didn't know what I needed, so I turned to Facebook groups, and some guys sold me quite crappy microphones, to be honest. It was important to me to film because I thought that if I'm a fashion blogger and I deal with aesthetics, then it's appropriate that my content is also visual. And therefore, I got a bit stuck on the filming part, I admit, even though the podcast format allows us as women to let go of this visibility issue. We can sit in front of the microphone with ourselves and just talk. So I was a bit stuck on this part that was very, very important to me, that I get video content out of the episodes. So I decided to record in the office, which was very, very beautiful and bright, an office with crazy acoustics and crappy microphones, okay? And not only that, I didn't know I was supposed to sit close to the microphone. So actually the microphones were just for decoration. And if you go back to the first episode I recorded with my amazing friend Xavier Kunis, it's really almost unlistenable because the sound is so bad. When I started the podcast, it was finally after I really tried to offer it to some sponsors, to some companies that I thought would be interested in deep and meaningful content like this with me. For example, DAV, which holds the flag of self-acceptance and changing the ideal of beauty and positive body image. I had an amazing meeting with them right before Corona, and the marketing manager at the time was really excited about the idea, and it was very innovative at that time, and we almost went ahead. And then came the COVID, so I had already thought of doing it on the subject of body image with Daf. But when I decided to start it independently, I chose to deal with the subject of personal branding. Because I understood, not really understood, but felt that personal branding distills the subject of identity, titles, content, how I present myself in the world, how I bring my unique voice. Apparently it was something that wasn't yet clear on the surface, but intrigued me. And I decided to embark on this journey. Now, this matter of understanding while moving is something I do a lot in life. I notice it as a recurring pattern, jumping into the water, starting the project, starting the journey, and gradually understanding why I chose what I chose, how it actually supports me and contributes to the future. Sometimes it doesn't work out and I move on and try other things. But in the case of the podcast, there was really something there that kept me going. Even though it was hard and I had to learn everything alone and I learned to edit alone, I didn't have a budget to invest in recording and editing, so I actually learned alone. Later, Natalie connected me to Zach Aviad, a sound editor who upgraded my podcast experience tremendously. He also recommended what equipment to buy. I had such a serious question at the beginning, like, okay, it's a podcast on personal branding and I'm a fashion blogger / mini celeb. Right, model, a agency manager. I'm a lot of things. Who are the guests I want to host here? And the fear I had of what they would think, and the fear I had to approach the successful or famous people was too great. Like I said, wait, let's see that I really know how to interview, that I know how to do a podcast. I can't ask Marina Maximilian to come on the podcast before I know it's really professional and worthy. So I decided to start with friends. So my dear friend Koivevet, who is an amazing content creator and blogger, came for the pilot episode. I see here a picture on Instagram with my friend Shir Pelid, actually photographed in the studio of the offices we had in the agency. I simply convinced the community manager to purchase podcast equipment and make a special room for recordings. To their credit, I must note they did it. They bought quality equipment. It was a crazy upgrade in sound and it was really nice to record there. But at some point, like, there was no one to operate it daily and people were playing with the equipment there. And in the end, I decided to stop recording there. When did I buy the equipment? When did I buy my own equipment? A year later. And here, look at the post I write. Exactly a year ago, I published the first episode of my podcast. I started the podcast after about 5 years where I only talked about a podcast. I was interviewed on other people's podcasts and looked for someone to give me the opportunity to record under their sponsorship. I approached several podcast networks, offered different brands to collaborate on starting a podcast, talked about it, wrote about it, but it didn't happen. And a year ago, I decided to implement what I teach. We are not waiting for some miracle to be sent from the sky. We are active and take responsibility for our dreams. And so I decided to embark on this journey of starting a podcast. I started without a budget and without time while managing an agency, mentoring and creating content. And somehow I started to fit recordings and edits into my schedule. It wasn't perfect as I hoped, but it was an active step of realization. While moving, I learned recording and editing. I became more efficient, improved, bought better quality equipment, and started working with an editor. Thanks to the podcast, I met interesting women and heard from them their stories about the journey to the front and realizing dreams. I participated in a panel at the Israeli Podcast Conference that Natalie Rogel invited me to. And I admit it was a crazy surprise. And I had only about 10 episodes and I was sitting there with crazy podcasters in the country who have the strongest podcasts, like One a Day, Making History, and more series. And I even sat next to the amazing Ruti Rudner, who reassured me and said that she also has only about 7 episodes in her excellent podcast, 25 Hours. Let's continue. Conference, okay, interesting content projects came to me, and mainly I felt that this authentic content of my guests managed to touch people. So in honor of Juicy Talks 1-year anniversary, I invite you to write me all your questions here and I will create special instructional content for you. And if I have one tip, it would be don't get bogged down in the technical details. Everything is solvable. The most important step is the decision to embark on the journey. Wow, how accurate am I? I wonder what the reactions were here. Mainly inspiration, how fun it is to have you, an inspiring podcast. I would really, really, really love for there to be questions here. I really want to answer you. I want to help. I want to teach you. To take women with me hand in hand to the top. If I discover ways that can help us realize ourselves outside, fulfill dreams, express ourselves, bring our voice into the world, help each other, I will do it. This is my driving force in life. We talked earlier about meaning and Viktor Frankl. So this is my meaning in life. I want to read here a post I asked Natalie Rogel, Natalie who helped me with the podcast. Tell me, can anyone make a podcast? What is needed? What skills, conditions before even starting? So her answer was definitely anyone can make a podcast. It's necessary and recommended to be creative and unique enough not to get lost among all the existing offerings. Oh, and back then there weren't as many offerings compared to today. To understand what your unique color and style are, always think about what would be interesting. What would be interesting for you to listen to as a listener, and no less important, what value I give to my listeners? If I was asked to summarize, I think the most important thing is to be creative and consistent. Wow. So you should know it's funny, but I wasn't so consistent in my podcast. The question is also, what is consistency? Some people will say it's once a week. Some will say it's just putting yourself out there. So I just put myself out there. There wasn't even a very defined format. There were periods when I recorded more. There were periods when I recorded less. There was the period after the wedding, which was a serious crisis, a serious identity crisis that I had to go through with myself. And then it took time until I released episodes, until I moved on. I went back to recording 6 months after the wedding. It's funny, wow, to see everything together here. The first episode I recorded after returning from the break was with Sarit Kleiman, who actually transitioned from the fashion world to the high-tech world, and today she is the social responsibility and employee experience manager at K-Health. She helped me a lot. I wanted to enter the work world, find a job as an employee. I said, okay, now I'm married, I need something steady, something safe, and Sarit really, really helped and advised me. Here's a quote from Sarit. Almost everything you encounter or learn in life has a reason. It meets you somewhere later. And it's true. Today I can say that I see all the dots connecting. I think the hardest thing for me was to admit that I am not perfect, that I am not sure of myself, that I am not as successful as everyone thinks or as I thought. It took me time to show my cracks. I think the meeting I had with Ron at Kefir helped me a lot. I hosted an episode with Doran Frankfurt. I think at that time I finally dared to be photographed without makeup. At some point it was in November 2022. I recorded an episode with Dikla Malamud. Everyone told me you're talking about personal branding. You must meet Dikla Malamud, and Dikla said that people connect to you through the cracks. Then I learned there's a song by Leonard Cohen where he says the cracks exist for light to enter through them, and it moved me very much. In general, as connections, the understanding that cracks are something that exists, and if we look at it realistically, we can decide what to do with it next. In December 2022, my dear friend and neighbor Aya, who is also a talented photographer, took headshots of me as a podcaster. Wow, that was really brave to say, Ray, you are a podcaster. You deserve to have pictures with headphones and a microphone. It's part of your branding. By the way, Aya, if you're listening to this, we must take new pictures. When was it? In January? In January 23rd, I recorded an episode for Maya and Dory's new podcast, who was in my mentorship program of the role models, and then participated in Married at First Sight and became a star. So she started a new podcast at the Talk Studio in Ramat HaSharon. At the same time, I started recording a professional podcast for By Me. By Me is, is known for its vouchers. Their business department is actually built for working with HR managers who take care of vouchers for their employees. We created content intended for HRs, and it was fascinating. One of the things I discovered there during the recordings is the tremendous impact HR managers have within the organization. And today it's already understood that the human resource is the most important resource, and investments are being made in it. Thank God. Last April, I released the episode with the amazing Corinne Kitzis, who is a top-notch podcaster and an amazing star. I'm happy to see her success. We talked about the gap between our image and our authentic self, and it was a fascinating episode. In general, the connection with Corinne is very fun and helps me. Many times we consult with each other, and this made me understand how important it is to have friends who are in a similar content world to yours, who simply add to my life just by being close to them and sharing ideas with them. In May 2023, I already helped the lovely photographer Ido Lavi set up his podcast, and he also started editing with Zach. The truth is, he started the podcast even before that in the studio when they did everything for him, but I helped him understand how to do it alone, and we recorded a lovely episode for his podcast together. At the same time, I recorded episodes for a series on practical skills and abilities for screens, financial management, time management, home organization, inheritances, and durable power of attorney. The last episode I recorded myself before I started working with Talk Studio was the episode with Mayan Erez Melinarski, the CEO of the Shavot Association, responsible for projects like Girls Week, which you all know. We recorded an episode about the importance of role models, about the era of role models. There's a connecting thread. You could say in August, I actually started recording at Talks and really understood the meaning of a studio. Working together was always something I wanted to do. And I identified that I have some power I can use. And this power is my exposure and the authentic content I create one-on-one. It can become a product. And essentially, I can start giving women the opportunity to tell their story and talk about their work on my podcast, and this can become a product I earn from. That means I don't need to wait for sponsors. I can start creating this thing myself. And then October 7th happened, no need to expand. A month later, a Yuval Zilber, God bless his soul, was killed in Gaza. If for those who don't know, Yuval was Rom's brother, and Rom is my sister from my father's side and the son of Yaeli. I share in your grief over Yuval, even though, unfortunately, I didn't know him. It brings me back to Viktor Frankl and this matter of meaning. What meaning did I actually have to want to keep getting up every morning to reinvent myself, to understand what I can do and how I can make a living, how I can bring my unique voice and my superpower to the world, what I can give to the world. I got to talk about this a lot with Ohad lately, that the meaning of life is actually to live them full of meaning, because each and every one of us was born once. This is a unique creation of the universe. We have a unique DNA. This genetic code came into the world and will not come again. There was and will be no other creature like me. Even for those who don't believe in God, think about it. It's freaking rare. It's a wonder. It's magic. It's a miracle that I am who I am and that you are who you are and He is who He is. I believe the most meaningful way I can live my life and make the most of it is to explore what else I can bring out of myself and give. And this is something that has become very, very, very clear to me during the war, and it brings me back to what Galia said about freedom. It's getting closer to everything that is engraved in you. So indeed, during the war, I found my freedom, and after I realized I want to be independent, I want to have my recording studio that I am responsible for, that I can plan and decide what will happen in it and how it will be managed. And now I also know more and more what I want. I know I want to work from home. I know I don't want to be on the road. I know I want to work with women. I know I love intimate work one-on-one mainly or in small groups. I know I want to host. I know I want to use creativity and help both myself and other women bring themselves into the world. So this thing became clearer and clearer during the war and made me one day sit for coffee with Adi Tavor, an interior designer, and together we set out on this journey of setting up the studio while designing its space. It wasn't the only thing. I also had to build the workshops and my products, understand how all the technology here works together, find an external editor I can work with, and really somehow try to understand how all this becomes a fixed system that functions and supports me. Wow, what a journey. What a journey. And all this brings me here to tell you about the new phase in this journey, a phase where I will try to bring my thoughts openly and directly. I really want us to create a dialogue here. I really want us to talk. I really want us to talk about the creation itself. It was no coincidence that it was important for me to tell you about this whole process. And I also invite you to enter Juicy Talks channel. Listen to episodes from a year ago. Listen to episodes from 3 years ago and see the process. Recently, I also decided that I'm going to specialize in the technical field. Whether it's recording, sound, editing, video editing, all kinds of AI tools that can be used. I don't know how I will edit this episode. I don't know how long it will take me to edit it. I think I talked about what was really important for me to talk about, and that's my journey, my podcast journey that brought me to where I am today at 40, more whole, stronger, braver, understanding my superpowers. I talked here quite a bit about turning 40. There's even a series I did together with Efrat Fogel, who is a brain and consciousness researcher, about the gate and the opportunity we have in midlife to start anew in some way or continue anew. And I also wanted to talk to you about meaning and uniqueness in life. And we talked about it a bit. We'll talk about Viktor Frankl in depth later when I finish reading the book, which, by the way, is really hard. But it's a book every person needs to read without exception. It can give all of us some perspective also on what happened in the Holocaust and surely connect us to what's happening now and in Gaza. Each and every one of us can find meaning in our inner world. And I want to ask you, what do you feel about meaning? Where do you find your meaning today in this strange period we are in? What is your drive to get up in the morning, to keep going? I'm interested, share with me. I think this can give us worthy topics for the next episodes. And really that we can create a direct, authentic connection together. I would really love to open topics you raise and my thoughts, kind of like a newsletter that hopefully will be frequent. And in addition, there will also be episodes of Juicy Talk Business on the podcast. We are not giving up on that. There will be conversations with business owners. The goal is to bring their authentic story and focus on who they are, their values, and of course also on the products. But I'm really interested in talking about the story behind the brand. This has always been my greatest passion. Who stands behind this brand? What does she have to say? Why should I buy from her? And you should know that one of the most amazing things that happened to me recently is that all the services and products I purchase are bought from women who are friends, women I admire. And this is what is called Shikonomy. And we will talk about it also in the upcoming episodes. Actually, a women-based economy, an economy that is based on women who support and lift each other up, who help and support. It's time to make a change in this aspect too. Well, I think that's it. I want to say thank you for making it this far. And if you loved this episode and if you found something in it that you can pass on to others, I invite you to take the link and simply share it, whether it's on social media or WhatsApp. A reminder that we have a workshop starting next week for podcast creation and another workshop starting in June. And maybe there will also be a Zoom workshop in the summer. I'm considering it. The studio is open. We are open to new ideas and clients. And I invite you all to enjoy this juice. Honestly, it was really fun. Not simple, but I enjoyed every moment. I hope you did too.